ever since the shroud first really appears in history, there's been controversy about it, and there have been questions about its authenticity.
In an attempt to definitively resolve a centuries-old dispute, a group of experts used a sophisticated artificial intelligence system on the Shroud of Turin in 2025. The experiment was abruptly terminated by what the machine discovered. Researchers were left staring at something that violated every known law of science as data froze and alarms went off. There was disagreement over what the AI had discovered, but everyone agreed that it was concealed deep inside the fabric and that it altered everything. God's code was discovered by this machine. A potent artificial intelligence system was examining microscopic digital images of the Shroud of Turin in a temperature-controlled laboratory in northern Italy in 2025. Many people think that the linen, mentioned in John 26:7, once covered the body of Jesus Christ. The AI's job was to identify any chemical or structural flaws in the fibers. The data flowed smoothly over the panels for hours before the process abruptly stopped. When the system's algorithms identified something that it was unable to categorize right away, it had crossed a threshold. The central monitor displayed a notification. An unusual pattern was found. When they resumed the sequence, the same message reappeared, which led the main researcher to believe it was a glitch. The team recognized then that the AI had discovered something completely unanticipated, an underlying mathematical structure concealed within the fabric. What followed would fundamentally upend both science and religion. The Shroud of Turin has been one of the most contentious artifacts on Earth for centuries. Its it is 14 feet long and 3.5 feet broad, with a faint, ghostly image of a man with crucifixion-like scars. It is the burial shroud of Christ to believers. It is a remarkable medieval fabrication, according to skeptics. According to historical accounts, it was first displayed in public in France about 1354. Since then, there has been a heated discussion about whether it is a clever trick or a hallowed truth. The debates have become more bizarre over time. According to others, the shroud was made using sunlight and silver salts in an antiquated kind of photography. Some said that a dying monk's blood and perspiration were used to paint it. Some claimed it was a planned deception intended to attract pilgrims and donations to a failing church. More radical voices asserted that the image was evidence of a meteor hit, or that it was burned onto the linen by electricity. Human life was recorded using ancient extraterrestrial technology. Some even proposed that it was an early hologram that time travelers had left behind. These hypotheses demonstrated how far individuals were ready to go in order to explain something that shouldn't exist, even though none of them ever received substantial evidence. Experts are still divided by the covering. Scientists acknowledge that its microscopic accuracy cannot be replicated by any known painting, dyeing, or burning technique. New tests revive the dispute every few decades, and each time, the riddle only gets more complex. The scientists received the same result each time they attempted to refute the findings. Within the tiny fibers of the linen, precise numerical ratios repeatedly appeared in the AI's data logs. These figures created a regular, well-organized pattern. Within the fabric, the algorithm logged these as regular numerical correlations, despite the fact that the weaving itself seemed random to the human eye. None of them fit established natural and artistic patterns, according to the scientists. Any known medieval process could not handle the sequence's complexity. It was neither a natural imprint nor a painting. It was a structure of data. The study team made the decision to use various analysis programs to double-check the AI's results. All of the image's visual components were eliminated, leaving only the numerical data that the AI had gathered from the fibers. Once more, the same pattern emerged. This demonstrated that photographic or lighting faults were not the source of the outcome. The AI had identified a recurring pattern of numerals within the fabric itself. To put it simply, the fabric had an intrinsic structure that adhered to a precise mathematical sequence. It reminded the scientists of how digital data is stored in contemporary computers. The information appeared to be logically organized, as though it had been recorded or programmed in some manner. Since digital encoding technology did not emerge until thousands of years later, that was absurd. This was an emotional realization for many believers. They perceived it as a hint of order in what ought to be chaos and as potential proof of divine design. Some people were reminded of Psalm 19:2-1. God's glory is proclaimed via the heavens. The labor of his hands is proclaimed by the skies. The more the specialists examined the findings, the more difficult it was to explain them. It was no longer possible to write off the Shroud of Turin as a mere medieval relic. It now seemed to hold knowledge about something intelligent and intentional that science was still unable to comprehend. We need to take a deeper look at the image. Itself the centuries-old portrait of a crucified man that contemporary technology is still unable to explain in order to fully appreciate the significance of what the AI discovered. The unnatural 3D corpse. In 1898, the world was first taken aback by the Shroud of Turin. Secondo Pia, an amateur photographer and lawyer from Italy, was granted special permission to snap the company's initial images. He was astounded when he developed the negatives. A distinctly lifelike positive image of a man's face was created from the negative photograph and body. Thus, centuries before photography was created, the shroud functioned as a photographic negative. Scientists and religious experts were unable to understand how an ancient piece of cloth could have such an influence. Experts discovered something much more bizarre when they looked at the shroud under a microscope. Paint, pigment, or dye was not used to create the image. There were no indications of a human hand at work, no brushstrokes, and no indications of chemical application. Rather, the image was limited to the linen surface. It didn't seep into the threads underneath. It only impacted the outermost fibers, each of which was thinner than a human hair. The tint gave the impression that an intense burst of energy had either mildly burned or dried the top layer of fibers. No mechanical or natural method could replicate this phenomenon, according to scientists. More sophisticated studies over time showed that the image contains quantifiable three-dimensional data. This indicates that each pixel's brightness precisely matched the separation between the cloth and the body it formerly covered. The computer produced a perfectly proportional 3D model of a human person in the 1970s after processing the data through a NASA image analyzer. This outcome could not be explained by any known Middle Ages artistic or photographic approach. It appeared as though depth information had been captured in the picture, which was only possible if the cloth had been momentarily suspended over a human body. The world's attention was rekindled by this discovery. For believers, it was tangible evidence of Luke 24-39. They did not consider the shroud to be an artistic representation when the risen Jesus said, "Look at my hands and my feet. It is I myself. Touch me and see." It served as a tangible witness to the actual resurrection. The image's wounds matched descriptions of crucifixion exactly. There are cuts on the side, wrist, and foot punctures, and blood flows in the direction of gravity. On the other hand, skeptics provided a variety of reasons. Some said that heating a sculpture and pressing linen against it was a sophisticated medieval tactic. Others asserted that it was painted using light-sensitive chemicals and an antiquated photographic technique. Some also proposed that it was a haphazard stain pattern that was misinterpreted for a face. However, all attempts to replicate the shroud with these techniques were unsuccessful. Its flawless 3D precision, non-directional shading, and minute detail were all impossible to replicate. The scientific community was left perplexed. The shroud was from a period before cameras, but it behaved like a real photograph. Centuries before anyone knew how to encode it, it transmitted depth data. The mystery only grew with each subsequent exam. Researchers were plagued by a straightforward question. What kind of force produced it if no humans did? A single burst of ultraviolet light might have produced the image, according to some physicists. Others suggested that something far beyond our knowledge could have created the result. Physics, such as a simultaneous change in both matter and energy. Scientists started delving deeper when they ran out of physical explanations. They resorted to digital analysis in the hopes that sophisticated artificial intelligence would reveal information and hidden structures that were invisible to the human eye. The blueprint that lies beneath the skin. Scientists anticipated sharper photos of the face and body when they employed artificial intelligence to clean up the high-resolution digital scans of the Shroud of Turin. Rather, they discovered something very different. The AI identified patterns that were not present in the visible image after the visual noise was eliminated. The microscopic structure of the cloth contained mathematical linkages and recurring shapes. The face was covered in crisscross lines, spirals, and circles. Hands as well as the torso. These forms weren't arbitrary. They demonstrated a degree of accuracy that could not have been coincidental by adhering to precise, numerical proportions that matched one another across the fabric. The ratios that the researchers discovered after measuring these proportions were almost exactly the same as the golden ratio, a mathematical constant that may be found in nature, art, and architecture. Ancient temples and cathedrals were designed with the same ratio. In 1 Kings 6, which describes how Solomon's temple was built, scholars found that the spacing of some patterns matched geometric arrangements. The designs were so precise that they seemed to be arranged according to a mathematical principle rather than human creativity. The data models of the AI verified that even in regions where the apparent characteristics were weak or absent, the patterns continued to repeat throughout the whole image. This implied that the design was included in the fiber's natural structure rather than being added by hand. The researchers were unable to come up with a solution. Such microscopic geometric alignment could not be produced by any known medieval method. It was not like staining, painting, or burning. Rather than being an artistic production, it appeared to be a sort of coded structure, as though the cloth had physically captured an occurrence. The shroud was described by some scientists as a data map, a visual record of an actual moment that had left quantifiable energy or information traces. They contrasted that with the way modern digital sensors capture light, either radiation or heat. One expert described it as a physical blueprint of a transformation, speculating that the energy pattern of the event that produced the image may have been physically etched into the fibers. Some went so far as to suggest that the linen may have served as an early type of data storage, retaining not only an image but also the full geometry of the human body it covered. A centuries-old dispute between faith and science was rekindled by this unexpected finding. The results were seen by many believers as evidence of divine purpose. The results were extremely concerning to skeptics, because they perceived the geometric order as a type of God's signature written into matter. Mirroring Psalm 104-24, which states, "How many are your works, Lord? In wisdom, you made them all." The proof didn't indicate a fake, but neither could be explained by accepted scientific theories. It contradicted all they believed to be true regarding the shroud's possible creation. The scientific team realized at this point that they were no longer examining an image. They were researching a phenomenon that, unlike any item, linked mathematics, physics, and biology. The fabric appeared to bear the imprints of both creation and deterioration simultaneously. The world has previously written off the Shroud of Turin as a medieval hoax, despite these astounding discoveries. The cause was a single faulty experiment that nearly erased the truth and influenced public opinion for decades. The lie, the fire, and the patch. In 1988, 3 distinct labs, one in Zurich, one in Oxford, and one in tiny samples of the Shroud of Turin, were provided to Tucson for radiocarbon testing. The world was stunned when the results were made public. The cloth's provenance was determined by all 3 labs to be between 1260 and 1390. The headline appeared in newspapers all around the world. The shroud turned out to be a hoax. That was the end of the narrative for a lot of people. They claimed that the shroud was just a cunning medieval fake. The world moved on, and the church silently accepted the outcome. However, there was a problem. The test piece of cloth came from a single, tiny spot close to the shroud's edge. Although the color and texture of this portion appeared slightly altered, it was written off as aging or damage. This specific corner had been restored following a terrible fire in 1532, when molten silver from a reliquary burned through portions of the cloth, according to new research conducted years later. To repair the torn section, medieval nuns meticulously stitched in fresh threads. Instead of the original linen, the test sample had come from that repaired patch. Using chemical and microscopic research, American scientist Raymond Rogers, who was a member of the initial scientific team, re-examined fibers from the same region. Everything was altered by what he discovered. Cotton mixed with gum and dye materials frequently employed in medieval repairs was present in the tested fibers. However, the remainder of the fabric was composed of pure linen that had been spun in a manner typical of Middle Eastern weaving from antiquity. There was no denying the change. The studied material was chemically younger than the remainder of the shroud, according to Rogers' findings. The dating from 1988 was predicated on tainted and modified threads. Both scientists and believers were incensed by this finding. Many questioned how a sample from a clearly repaired part could have been used for such a crucial test. Some said that the church permitted the faulty test in order to evade closer examination out of concern for scandal or confirmation of an unexplainable phenomenon. Others thought that because the true age of the shroud would put long-held beliefs about faith and science in jeopardy. Doubters had hurried to shut the case. In the years that followed, independent researchers employed novel techniques like textile comparison studies, Raman analysis, and vibrational spectroscopy. These examinations did not depend on carbon degradation, but on the linen's molecular aging. The findings consistently suggested a considerably older origin, consistent with the time of Jesus of Nazareth, somewhere in the 1st century. As additional information became available, it became evident that politics and human error had influenced the shroud story just as much as science. The fabric, which many believed had been disproved, was at the heart of intrigue once more. After the discrediting of carbon dating, scientists went back to the shroud with fresh instruments and receptive minds. This time, they would look for indications of vitality, knowledge, and possibly even something more akin to divine light itself, the fabric that spoke to the machines. The AI team switched from researching geometry to analyzing energy as they continued to delve further into the shroud of landscape. The previous scans had previously disclosed exact mathematical ratios incorporated into the fibers. However, the algorithm started transforming those identical numerical patterns into frequency, a different type of data. Pure harmonic tones were produced by processing the geometric alignments using frequency conversion, a technique that converts numerical ratios into sound. These tones resembled the numerical patterns found in ancient religious music and temple architecture. Upon deeper examination, experts discovered that these figures corresponded to precise sound intervals that were initially reported over 2,000 years ago by the Greek mathematician Pythagoras. Pythagoras taught that basic mathematical ratios, the same ones that produce musical harmony, govern the entire cosmos. This was referred to as the music of the cosmos in ancient belief, indicating that the universe was based on ordered vibration and sound. The results were evident when the researchers employed the AI to translate the geometric ratios of the shroud into sound. The same old harmonies were followed by the system's smooth, precisely timed musical notes. It wasn't just any noise. The shroud appeared to contain a pattern of harmony and order, akin to a secret melody retained in the fabric strands. After analyzing the data, physicists proposed energy resonance as a potential explanation. They thought that the image on the shroud might have been created when the linen was struck by a rapid, strong burst of electromagnetic radiation. Without burning through the deeper layers, this kind of energy could momentarily change the fabric's surface molecules. From a scientific perspective, this would explain why the picture is limited to the top fibers of the fabric and does not extend below them. If it had actually occurred, the entire event would have lasted less than a billionth of a second. It would have been powerful enough to leave a flawless photographic imprint of a human body, but too quick for heat or fire to spread. Theologians have a distinct perspective on this concept. They thought that the same energy might symbolize the force of creation itself, an indication of divine order. They cited Psalm 156, which states, "Let everything that has breath praise the Lord," to them. Discovering quantifiable harmony and structure inside the shroud implied that even the world's fabric could react to God's might. According to this theory, the shroud may not only depict a man's appearance, but also the remnant of an actual instance in which physical matter responded to an incomprehensible stimulus. When a team of researchers discovered that the geometric ratios matched architectural dimensions, conjecture grew more intense. Discovered in hallowed locations like Rome's Great Basilica and Jerusalem's Church of the Holy Spirit, measurements based on early musical intervals that were thought to represent heavenly proportion were used in the design of both structures. The cloth's design may have adhered to the same cosmic principles utilized in ancient temples. If those patterns were present in the shroud, light, music, and structure seem to have come together in a single enigmatic moment that was caught on a plain piece of linen. Although the Vatican did not issue an official comment after the discovery, theologians and physicists started having private conversations about it. The harmonic resonance may be a natural result of the imaging process, according to some scientists. Some questioned whether it symbolized something far more potent. Some cited Matthew 28:2.